The next morning, my eyes opened right away when my travel alarm clock went off. The first thing that popped into my mind was, I wonder if the kid ever found his grandma. I decided I'd ask at breakfast. Jude's bed was empty and she was gone. So I got a chance to get up, put my clothes away, go to the washroom, and dress in blessed privacy. When I went over to the restaurant, I noticed that Irene was sitting at a table by herself, and all the penny pinchers and Jude were in the same booth as last night. Apparently they just had some kind of business meeting, because as I approached, I heard Bunny say, well, if I had a pen, I could write you a check right now. Frankie's got a pen, said Mary Lou. She carries it with her all the time. So Frankie whipped out her fancy pen and handed it to Bunny, and Bunny signed the check and sent it to and gave it to Frida. And Frida said that the whole thing was over, and the business meeting was over, and they could order. And once again, they had saved me a seat right next to Jude. So after we ordered, I said, did anybody hook up with their grandson last night? All the penny pinchers looked blank. So I added, well, his teenager came into the motel and asked for his grandma, who was riding on the school bus. Well, none of the penny pinchers had a grandson that age, and neither did Irene. We even asked her. The closest we came was Mary Lou had a great-grandson who lived in Vancouver with his mother. But as Mary Lou pointed out, why would he give her a present to bring over to the island if he was coming himself? So then the waitress arrived with a huge tray of breakfast and started passing them out, and that pretty much killed the conversation. And while we all dug in, and then after a second round of coffee and tea, Frida said, well, we better get a move on if we want to make the Rock Cod Cafe by lunch. The penny pinchers getting a move on looked like a slug stampede. I was beginning to think we were going to be lucky if we got them all on the bus by noon. Raven helped out by saying that she would collect everybody's bags and take them out to the bus. Jude disappeared again. It turned out that she had gone to the front desk to inquire if there had been any reports of vandalism during the night. Like, who cares? I threw the keys at her and said, get the bus. She went. By the time she got back, all the penny pinchers and Irene were sitting in the lobby with their coats on and their purses in their laps. Raven went out with their luggage cart to put things in the back of the bus. I made Jude get out and help her, and I plunked myself down in the driver's seat. My idea was, first we load Frida, then we load the luggage. But Frida said no, it was better if we loaded the luggage first and then her, and that way, if she had to get off, we could unload her without having to unload all the luggage too. So that's what we did. So everything was going according to plan until Jude went to the back, opened the lift door, and pressed the button. All we could hear was the sound of the traffic on the island highway and a couple of crows up in a tree. She pressed the button again and again with successive. She even banged it on the side of the bus. The crows stopped cawing. That does it, I said. We are not moving another inch until we get that lift fixed. Jude gave me a, so what now, smarty look. She realizes my temper very well. She knows that I did not think about the fact that we did not know where to get a switch. We didn't know reliable mechanics on the island. And in order to do anything like that, we'd have to phone Sam. I banged my fist on the steering wheel. Raven said, I got a cousin who works at Ivy Green gas station. Maybe he could fix it. How far, said Jude. Oh, maybe 30 minutes. Fine, I said. Raven and I will drive the bus to this Ivy Green place and see if her cousin can fix the lift. You stay here and call Sam and get authorization. So Raven looked at Frida, and Frida said, it's fine, go. I'll be fine till you get back. And then she turned her wheelchair around and started back to the lobby. All the penny pinchers fell in behind her, and Jude brought up the rear. So following Raven's directions, I drove south along the island highway. Nanaimo businesses straggled both sides of the highway, so it kind of had that look of an ugly industrial strip. A sign for Petroglyph Provincial Park reminded me that we were surrounded by beauty even though we couldn't see it. Further on, a sign, offered me the chance to bungee jump into a river. Yeah, right. Then we went through a place called Cassidy, which reminded me of my high school principal. After that, we got into some forested place with firs and cedars and arbutus clinging to rocky outcrops. It was beginning to feel like a rainforest, when suddenly there was the Ivy Green gas bar. It had 8 pumps and every one of them was full service. Raven said that it was on Penellicut Reserve land and the tribe hired people to work there, and also in the grocery store and the fast food place that was connected to it. The whole place was busy with people off the highway buying gas and locals buying groceries and feeding their kids. This woman with a name tag that said Celeste came up and asked me if she could fill the tank, check the oil, and wash the windshield. Blast from the past! She told Raven that Wayne was in the back, so Raven went in to get him. After Celeste was through with the bus, I drove it into the parking lot so I wouldn't be tying up a pump. Raven came out with Wayne, who he was a few inches taller than her and had really well muscled across the chest and impressive biceps. He got up on the fender and he looked at the battery and the wiring. Then he went around and opened the lift door. I was so afraid that the damn thing was going to work, but this time it seemed to be well and truly dead. After looking at it, he said, "Well, I could hotwire it." That did not make me happy. When he found out that we were headed to Cow Bay, he suggested that if we dropped him at the auto parts store in Duncan, if he could pick up the part, he could take it to his uncle's garage and fix it. So his uncle's garage was right near the Ocean View Hotel where we were going to be staying. So that sounded like a plan to me. The only problem was how to get Frida on the bus before we got the lifts fixed. When I considered the number of trips back and forth I would have to make in order to get the switch fixed before I picked up Frida and then drove to I thought, life is short and hot wiring is not that big a deal. I told Wayne that would be fine. Hot wiring would be fine. So back we went to Nanaimo. I got Wayne to lower the lift before I went in and got everybody, and then I introduced him as a person who was gonna fix the switch, and all the penny pinchers, except Irene, gave him gracious smiles and thanked him for helping. Once again, the procession moved across the parking lot to the bus. Jude almost had a Harry when Wayne touched the wires together to make the lift go up, but Frida was game, and it wasn't like we weren't gonna fix it. Jude was the last one on the bus. She passed out lap rugs. There was a tense moment when we realized that by putting Wayne on the bus, it was full, and someone would have to brave the unfriendly vibes coming off Irene and sit next to her. And that someone was Jude. I smiled. The drive back to Cowichan Bay was very peaceful, at least in the beginning. I could tell in the rearview mirror that Frankie and Mary Lou were working on a crossword puzzle. Frida had gone to sleep. Raven and Wayne were talking in low voices. Jude and Irene were sitting like 2 bumps on a log. I figured that Jude was probably doing some weird meditation thingy. I had no idea what was going through Irene's mind. May was knitting, and Bunny couldn't seem to settle. She looked out the window for a while, and then she started talking to May, and then May asked her, "Please don't, I'm counting stitches." Then she ruffled in her purse, and she got out her nail file, and she was doing it. And then about Chemainus, she had the idea that they should all sing golden oldies. Well, the penny pinchers were real enthusiastic about that. And also, Jude joined in. She doesn't like to sing. I figured she was singing with gusto because she was bugging the hell out of Irene. So The bus was full of the treble voices of 80-year-olds and one slightly flat 60-year-old. Wow, I said, I haven't heard Mockingbird Hill since I was a kid. They kept it up in the parking lot of Ralph's Truck and Auto Parts when Wayne and Jude went in to put a Z Master Switch 92 on Sam's Visa. The guys coming out of the auto parts store cast curious glances at the singing bus. From the auto parts store, I drove out Suhalem Road. It winds through the country and it's way more scenic than a highway. We came across this big place called Providence Farm. It was a huge white building set with a steeple set back against the mountains and surrounded by trees. It was odd to see it there. Bunny said, well, according to this map, we're in QUW'UTSUN. I never heard of it. It's Cowichan in our own language, said Raven. Oh, Bunny said, who knew? We did, said Wayne. Raven and Wayne grinned. Oh, I see it now, said Bunny. Thank you. After that, we crossed the Cowichan River and we drove by a farm with huge rolls of hay wrapped in white plastic so they looked like gigantic marshmallows. We were just past the T where Cowichan Bay Road hit Suhalem Road when someone hollered, "Stop the bus!" Everybody stopped singing and I pulled over on the shoulder and stopped as fast as I dared. What? I said, look at the swans, one of the twins said. Well, I do like birds, and I must admit it was spectacular. I mean, there was a whole field of swans grazing with geese and some crows. The twin who seemed to know what she was talking about said, they're trumpeter swans. Well, I've seen swans, I mean 1 or 2 or 3, maybe in Stanley Park with millions of people around. But I've never seen them in the wild, like hundreds of them just kind of wandering around. Everybody on the passenger side of the bus got up to look out the windows on the driver's side so they could see the swans. Well, except Irene, who did turn her head, but lost interest. Fortunately, Frida was tied down on the driver's side so she could see fine from her window. Then they decided that we had to get closer so they could get off and take pictures. Bunny started rummaging through all the luggage to find her suitcase, and I drove up a little further and onto a tractor path and parked so Frida was on the swan side of the bus. Bunny was making a huge mess out of everything, so I just opened the door and I let everybody out. And the swan twin was the first one off the bus, and she was trying to get her phone to face the swans instead of herself. And May was trying to see if her cell phone had a zoom lens. And finally Bunny said, "Oh, I'll get a picture from somebody else." And she zipped up her suitcase and rushed off the bus. Jude looked at Frida in a half-hearted way and said, "Do you want to get off the bus?" Frida said, "No, thank you. I can see fine from right here, and I think we should reduce the number of times that Wayne does his trick with the wires." "You're a good woman, Frida," I said. Then I told Jude I wanted to get off and see the swans. "Fine," she said, "I'll stay with Irene and Frida." So I got off the bus and I joined the swan twin. I said, "Are the gray ones trumpeters too?" She said, "They're juveniles." Frida stuck her head out the window and said, "Trumpeter swans winter over in the Cowichan Valley every year. This is Cowichan Bay. It's one of my favorite destinations. That's Mount Suhalem on the left, and down there on the right you can see the village where we're going to be staying. This is one of the places where the salmon leave the ocean and go up the Cowichan River to spawn." "Is that a lumber pile out there?" asked May. "Yes, it is," said Frida. "The Cowichan Valley mills can ship their lumber all over the world from this port." "So much for nature," said Bunny. "I don't have enough of a zoom to get a good picture of the swans," said the swan twin. Well, it turned out that none of the penny pinchers had camera equipment that could get a good picture. Can we get any closer, asked May. If we go closer, they'll fly, said Raven. Well, it turned out that nobody really seemed interested in disturbing the swans, so after a moment they turned and started back to the bus. After that, there were no problems all the way to the hotel. Of course, it was only 2 kilometers. Now, I was all set for a hotel that advertised ocean view because if you stood at your window and looked left, you could see water. But these guys had undersold themselves. They were on the ocean. You could walk right out your balcony door and be on the shore. Beautiful view, lousy entrance. The overhang over the lobby door was too low for the bus to go through. So we ended up having to park in the parking lot on the side of a hill, which gave the parking lot was a bit slanted. This presented kind of problems for getting Frida off the bus. I mean, besides the fact that we were hot wiring the lift. The bus leaned a little bit toward the hotel. So, of course, so did the lift. So, of course, so did Frida when she was on it. So Raven got on the lift with her and put her hands on her shoulder in case she didn't have the upper body strength to keep from pitching forward. We all held our breath as Wayne touched the wires together and Frida descended. As soon as the lift hit the pavement, she powered on her wheelchair and motored off that sucker. We all cheered, except Irene. Wayne got the luggage cart from the hotel and pushed it uphill to the back of the bus. We piled everything on it and told people they could get their luggage in the lobby. I left Jude standing, surrounded by old ladies all talking at once, as we drove off to go to Wayne's uncle's garage. Revenge is sweet. Clarence's house was up a hill behind an old abandoned church. Wayne said it was called the Butter Church because in the 1800s, the priest who built it had raised the money for it by selling butter from his cows. It stood on a hill overlooking all of Cowichan Bay. It's so beautiful, I said. Why is it abandoned? Long story, said Wayne. I had the feeling he didn't want to talk about it. When we drove into the yard, a couple of medium-sized barky dogs came racing up to the bus doors. And, you know, they didn't look vicious, but there was no way I was opening the door. So Wayne stood up and said, "It's okay, they know me." So I opened the door, and Wayne stepped off into a fur frenzy. Apparently they were fans of his. I'm a cat person myself. There was a little boy about 9 and a little girl about 12 standing on the porch, and they waved at Wayne, and Wayne waved back, and then the kids started running, and Wayne started walking, and followed by his fur fan club, and I followed at a considered distance. So the little girl told Wayne that his grandma's sister was visiting. So before we could go to the garage, we all had to go into the house and be introduced around and have tea. So I concentrated really hard so I'd remember everybody's name. There was Clarence and his wife Selma and her mother Clarice. And oh nuts, I forgot her sister's name. And the little boy was James and the little girl was Sharon, and because I didn't care, I remembered that the dogs were Buddy and Luke. So by the time Wayne and Clarence started talking about going out to the garage, it was dark. So I went out with them and I drove the bus up to the garage. Clarence had a couple of fluorescent lights with huge reflector housings. So once I got the bus under the lights, there was really nothing for me to do. I wandered over to the door of the garage and looked out into the night. Clarence's house was all lit up. I could see Selma and her mother's sister sitting around the kitchen table. Selma was knitting with fat needles, and Clarice and her sister were sitting across from each other with their hands around their teacups. They looked settled. My eye was caught by a sudden soft light, and I turned. The moon had come out from behind the cloud cover, and it was almost full. It cast an eerie light on the abandoned church and the mountains behind it. I could see a round hole over the church door where I think a stained glass window must have been, and the doors were gone, so that the front door was a big black hole looking into the darkness of the church. I looked back at the garage, and Clarence was assembling the pieces of the new switch, and Wayne was spraying the manual override with WD-40. Good idea, I thought. And I looked up at the moon, and the clearing around it was big enough, so I figured I'd have time to walk over to the church. So I was very careful, because even though the ground was soft and I could kind of see, it was uneven, and I didn't want to jar the small of my back. I almost had a heart attack when Buddy and Luke came barking up to join me. They milled around me and licked my hand, and then they ran off on their way to the church, and I thought, nice doggies, I'm a friend of Wayne's. Anyway, we all three of us went to the church. We got there by different routes. Me, because I was very careful about where I was putting my feet, and them because they were following some mysterious trail. None of us went in. I could see through the empty windows that the moonlight had illuminated the inside of the church, and it was empty. There might have been some rooms up at the other end that I couldn't see, but I wasn't drawn to explore, and neither were the dogs. Luke flopped down beside me with his front paws extended out and his head kind of between them, and the only thing moving was his tail, which was twitching back and forth. I can take a hint. I walked over to the low wall where Buddy had gone to relieve himself, and I looked out into the darkness. I could tell that I was looking out at all of Cowichan Bay, but I couldn't see it. I could see the path of the moon on the water. I could see the lights of the village where we were staying, and I could see some lights scattered around the bay, probably where people were living. The blackness of the mountain cradled the whole bay. I got this feeling like I was looking out into forever. I get this feeling sometimes when I'm driving or walking in the country at night, especially when it's cold and quiet and there's not much light. It just feels like forever. I don't tell Jude about this because she thinks I'm weird enough already. She thinks you have to have color for beauty. I walked back to the garage with the dogs for company. Clarence had installed the switch and it was working. Wayne even got the manual override working again. Clarence says to me, the battery's almost shot. And I said, well, I only have to squeeze 5 more days out of it, and then it's Sam's problem. So I handed him Sam's credit card. I signed with a flourish, and Wayne and I started back to Cowichan Bay. Well, coming out to Clarence's house hadn't been much of a problem. There was only one tricky turn off the main road, and Wayne told me what to do. Going back was a different kettle of fish entirely. The rutted dirt road wound down between the bush and the treed cemetery of the Butchart. 25 years of driving a school bus, and I had to hunt around for the brights. I'd never had to use them. By the time I got to the main road, I was reminded to turn them off by the jerk who drove up behind me and didn't turn his off. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping he would pass me, but no such luck. I drove all the way to Cow Bay, backlit by this jerk. I'm sure it was a man. My apologies to Wayne and Clarence. When I got to Cow Bay, I realized I was really hungry. Why don't we go to the Rock Cod Cafe and see if the penny pinchers are still there? I'm starving. How about you? No, thanks, said Wayne. It's time I get back to the Ivy Green. If you drop me in front of the hotel, I can hitch. Oh, I'm sorry. Why don't you come in and have something to eat with us, and I'll drive you back afterwards. It's not a problem, said Wayne. Just drop me in front of the hotel. I always get a ride out of Cow Bay. Tell Tell Raven I'll catch her later. Well, all right, I said, but if you're still here when I get back, I'm giving you a lift back to Ivy Green. Deal, he said. When I stopped in front of the hotel to let Wayne out, Mr. Brightlights finally drove by so I could drive the, 500 meters to the Rock Cod Cafe in restful darkness. Walking from the bus to the cafe, I had 3 things in mind. 1, I hope my food came soon. 2, I hoped that the penny pinchers and Irene were there, and Jude wasn't. And 3, I hoped they hadn't got into any trouble yet.